And as we're moving across this field, just in the wide open, no cover at all, we get ambushed from probably 200 meters or so to our left.
Mm-hmm. Mike, thanks for being here.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it's awesome to be here. This is Six Studio.
Thanks, dude. It's good seeing you again.
Yeah, good seeing you, too.
So we'll get into a quick bio about you. Talk about your childhood. So, Michael Lindsay, from Western New York. You're first and foremost a Christian. You're also a husband, a father-to-be, a proud American. You served 13 years as a Reconnaissance Marine with the Marine Corps. You had deployments to the Middle East, Southeast Asia. And after leaving the military, over concerns about U.S. foreign policy, you're now starting a new venture in digital media and moving into the law field. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, let's get started, man. So tell me about growing up in New York.
Yeah, when I tell people I'm from New York, they immediately assume New York City. Mm-hmm. But I'm from Western New York, near like Rochester, Buffalo area. And I've actually never even been to New York City, which
really
surprises a lot of people. Yeah, it's like an 8-hour drive from where I grew up. So I'm from like the rural kind of area of Western New York, small town, like 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I grew up there in Western New York.
What made you get into the Marine Corps? How did that go from growing up like outside? Because was it pretty liberal outside of New York, or was it kind of conservative in the country?
No, so it's a pretty conservative area. You know, I think most of the liberal parts of the state are like in the cities, but like where I'm at or where I was at in like the more rural area, it's pretty conservative. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a different experience from what most people would probably think of, you know, being from the state of New York. But yeah, I mean, growing up in a small town, grew up hunting, shooting guns, riding dirt bikes, doing all that cool stuff with my dad and my brothers. So yeah, I mean,
did you know right away, like from a young age, like in high school, you wanted to join the Marine Corps, or how'd that come about?
So I actually wanted to join the military from before I can even remember. Like, I was a super little kid. Like, even my parents don't even specifically remember, like, when I was like, I want to join the military. It was just, like, immediately from the very start, that's what I wanted to do. But one of the, like, first things I recall when I was a really little kid is, I don't know if you've ever seen those commercials of the Marine Corps recruiting commercials where the guy's like climbing the mountain. He's like climbing the cliff and he gets to the top and becomes a Marine. And then you have the one where he like slays the dragon and becomes a Marine.
Yeah, it's like 90s CGI. And then he goes right into the dress blues with the sword.
Exactly. I remember that. I don't know. I was probably like 6 years old or something like that. And I saw that, and like before, I didn't even know what the Marine Corps was. I just knew right away when I saw those, like, that's what I want to do. 100%.
That's badass.
Yeah, yeah. So that's like the earliest memory I have of specifically saying I wanted to be a Marine, and it never changed. Like, from that point forward, there was never a point in time when that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then going forward a little bit from there, 9/11 happened, and I was about 9 years old when that took place. And even though I was pretty young at the time, I was old enough to kind of have the wherewithal to realize how significant it was and to be like, oh shit, like, we're going to war now. So that was a big turning point for me of being fully convinced that that's what I wanted to do. And from that point on, going through high school, and during that time in the 2000s or whatever that was, YouTube started to be a thing, and I would get back from school and just watch hours of videos of like footage of Marines from Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that. And
before they started censoring stuff on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Like all the
yeah, you could watch anything on YouTube. So yeah, I went through that, and so, like I said, there was never a point when I didn't want to be a Marine.
So did you know about Recon, like, after 9/11, or did you start watching these YouTube videos? You're like, dude, what are these guys that are out here kicking in doors?
that was pretty much it. As I got older and got into, it was probably around high school when I really started to research the specifics of what exactly do I want to do in the Marine Corps. And I knew if I was going to do it, I wanted to go all the way, do whatever was the most challenging thing I could find. And so just doing the research into the Marine Corps, came across Reconnaissance. And as soon as I knew what that was, I decided that that's what I was going to shoot for. That's what I wanted to do. So that was probably around like maybe 13, 14 years old when I found out about Marine Reconnaissance and decided that that's what I was going to do.
So what'd that look like? Did you already have an idea? You talked to like recruiting department, you started working out, or were you already in good shape, or how was that? Because you got a recon contract to join, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved, when I was a kid, I was involved in different, outdoor activities. Did some sports. I mean, I guess for most of us who've been in the military compared to like the average person, we're all in pretty good shape. But yeah, like throughout high school, I was, working out and training and running, and I did quite a bit of pool work in high school to prep for it as well.
What kind of pool work were you doing?
I mean, I had no clue what I was doing, so I was just out there, just freestyle swimming, breaststroke. It wasn't like a specific program or anything. I had no clue what to do exactly to get ready. I was just out there trying to do the best I could to prep as best as I knew how, but there was no like strategy behind it. So yeah.
Nice. So 9/11 happens, you're about 9 years old, and then 13, 14 realize what you want to do in the Marine Corps. So whenever you enlisted, how was boot camp, and then how did boot camp compare to BRC once you went in?
So I was able to graduate high school early. I was 17 when I graduated high school and went to boot camp at 17.
Oh, man. Me too.
And really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I turned 18 in boot camp.
Me too.
We're twins.
Yeah. Yeah, so boot camp actually was, I don't want to sound arrogant or anything, but I know a lot of other people say this too, is boot camp was actually pretty easy, surprisingly. They talk it up a lot, like it's going to be this really difficult thing, and it is in some ways, but if you just do what you're told and do it as fast as you can, they're not even going to know you're there. My drill instructors at graduation didn't know my name, didn't know I was in their platoon.
You've seen Forrest Gump, right?
Yeah.
Where he's like taking apart the rifle. He's like, "Why'd you take apart that rifle so fast?" Because you told me to, Drill Sergeant.
Yeah.
Like, God damn it, that's the best answer I've ever heard.
Yeah. It's just like, hey, you told me to do something, so I did it. Like, all right, But yeah, boot camp was, it's long. I mean, it's definitely not easy, but as long as you do what you're told and go through the motions, it's not too bad. But then from there, when I joined the Marine Corps, I joined with a recon contract. So that's basically just saying, once you get out of boot camp, at least how it worked at the time that I was in, you graduated boot camp and then you went through ITB, Infantry Training Battalion, to become an 0311 infantry rifleman. And then from there, you would go to the basic reconnaissance course to have an opportunity to pass that training and become a reconnaissance Marine. Obviously, it's not a guarantee. Just because you have a recon contract, you still have to pass all of the training that's necessary. So I went in with a recon contract, graduated boot camp at Paris Island, and then went out to Camp Pendleton, California for infantry training. And that's about 2 months long. And so from there I went to, at the time, again, everything's changed since all of this happened, but at the time it was called MART, Marines Awaiting Reconnaissance Training.
When I was there, they still called it MART.
Okay.
All the guys in the white shirts running around, yep.
Yeah. I think it's gone through a couple of different names. I think it's been called like the Basic Reconnaissance Primer course or something like that now, maybe. But yeah, I went to MART. I was there for, I think, about 2 months, and it's really just a holding platoon while you're waiting for a Basic Reconnaissance course to start.
They're just drowning all the PFCs that went right out of School of Infantry, had no idea how to swim, what they're doing. They're just like, come on over here.
There were a whole bunch of guys that I went from infantry training with over to MART. And day one, as soon as you get there, the MART instructors explain to you what it is, explain what you're doing and what's expected of you, and like half of the guys quit on the spot. We were just checking in.
Yeah.
Like, just checking in administratively. They're like, I don't want to be here. So,
I don't want to drown. That's not what I want to do.
yeah, I did not know what I was signing up for. So, yeah, like 2 months at MART, and then picked up with the basic reconnaissance course class. This was 2011, early 2011.
So when you went through, did they, because I went through a couple years ago, but there's BRPC, which was the primer course, and then it went right into BRC, first, second, and third phase. Did you have a primer course, or did you just go from MART and then class up right into first phase?
It was just straight from MART into first phase.
Oh, okay.
And the thing about that is you don't learn anything at MART. You just get thrashed the whole time. It's just, it was the morning was land PT and the afternoon was pool PT.
Did you have ropes back then? Were you guys ropers in MART?
Yeah. You're a roper, carry your rope around everywhere. But that was it. It was just a thrash fest for however long you were there. Some guys were there for several months before they could class up. And yeah, it was just get thrashed on land in the morning, thrash in the pool in the evening, and just wait for your class to start.
So for those that don't know, so you have first, second, and third phase in BRC. So what was that when you went through?
So first phase was the pool and land navigation. Second phase was amphib, and third phase was patrol.
Do you have a favorite, one that you liked, one that you hated?
Patrol would probably be the favorite, just
Yeah.
because the first two were water related. The pool and the ocean, which is what everybody hates the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because it's amphibious reconnaissance.
Mm-hmm.
Yet everybody hates the water when you're there. Just like, this sucks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was the first like 2/3 of it is just all getting thrashed in the pool, and then you go down to Coronado to train in the ocean and in the bay. And then, I mean, patrol phase sucks. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of sleep deprivation, carrying a lot of heavy rucks around. But I would pick that over the water any day.
Oh, you're just getting bottom samples in the bay.
Yeah. Swimming all the way down to the bottom, grabbing some dirt, bringing it back up to the top, just to amuse the instructors.
Yeah. I remember when I checked in, and I was in holding, I think, before BRPC, and we're all out there waiting, and on the rocks out there behind the new building, and we're all in formation, and one of the sergeants comes out, looks at everybody, and he's like, "Go do Murph," and we're all like, "All right," and we go run and do Murph. We get done and we come back and we're back in formation. He comes out and he's like, "Do it again." And so we go do it again. We were doing 3 Murphs that day, just cause.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you don't realize as a student is the instructors, they have time to kill. They're probably waiting for some logistical bullshit or whatever to happen, and they've got this whole class of students. All right, we got to keep them busy.
Yep.
Thrash them for a couple hours. Yeah. That's the thing about BRC, though, that I will say is, compared to, at least my understanding, is you have a lot of other, whatever you want to call them, elite units that have extremely difficult training. Some of it's longer than BRC. But I will say I think BRC is unique in that it builds mental toughness in a way that the other organizations don't.
How so?
Well, first of all, the water is 99% psychological. It is almost entirely psychological because it's all about just staying calm. Staying calm under extreme pressure, especially like physical pressure and physical stress, and finding a way to not panic.
Right.
It's not easy, and they say the pool in BRC is the great equalizer. You have all these studs, big strong dudes. They can outrun anybody. You put them in the pool, and they'll break in 20 minutes.
Did they have you all, when you were going through, in the corner of the deep end in formation doing the deep end cards?
Yeah, we do all of that. The beehive.
Yeah.
You're trying to tread water, but you're all like shoulder to shoulder, and you can't move your arms or your legs to tread water. So.
I remember. I think it was. I think we were testing out on the crossovers. It might have been in BRPC, but we were testing out the crossovers, and we were in our little khaki shorts by then.
Yeah.
And so you do the crossover and then you get out and then you face away. So you're like, everybody's sitting and you're kind of like huddled. And it was, I think in like March or May. So it was cold up there in that valley in Pendleton.
Yeah.
And so everybody, you get done and you get on the pool deck and you sit down, you face away from the pool and you hold on to the guy in front of you. And we were all so cold and shivering. It was like that scene in Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
When he's on the back of the moped, he's like, you got to pee? Just go, man.
Dude,
And so we're all just, dude, I was like, you got to pee, man? Just go for it. And we're all just pissing and holding on to each other to warm up.
that's the secret about BRC, and I'm sure it happens in other places in the military too, is we've all pissed on other dudes and been pissed on by other dudes because
It's not gay.
it's not gay if you're cold. That's the rule. It is not gay if you're cold. All right?
I know, I saw this funny. It's like you join the military and then you get out just to be the gayest straight friend in all your friend groups.
They don't get it.
No,
They don't get it.
Yeah. So you went through BRC and then do you go to jump and dive right after, or?
No, so I didn't go right away. So for most Recon Marines, you want to be what's called insert complete, get all of your insert qualifications, which includes low-level static line jumping, free fall jumping, and dive school. But for me, I graduated BRC in 2011 in April and got orders to 1st Recon Battalion, again at Camp Pendleton. And 1st Recon was scheduled to deploy to Afghanistan later that year. So I went from BRC straight into a workup. I didn't get any additional schools or anything like that.
Oh, man.
So I went straight into a workup, doing all of our team level and platoon and company level training out at 29 Palms and there at Pendleton.
Mm-hmm. So what did that workup look like for you guys? What were you guys doing?
It was interesting because we would go to 29 Palms and you do a lot of basic infantry tactics. Really, that's for the most part that's what it was. And also with me just being a 19-year-old kid, I think at that time, fresh out of BRC, I was a 19-year-old Lance Corporal. They just gave me the saw, and they're like, "Hey, just do what you're told. Get on security, point the saw in that direction." I'm like, "Okay,
I can do that."
Yeah. So I mean, just being fresh into the fleet, I didn't know what the fuck was going on half the time. I was just doing what I was told. I mean, it's just like drinking from a fire hose, trying to learn everything that's going on. But yeah, the workup was relatively short before deployment, so I didn't get any additional schools or anything like that. I just went straight into a team, and then we started the workup. Like I said, 29 Palms, doing team level buddy rushes, convoy operations, a lot of IED training. That was probably the bulk of it.
So within a year from graduating BRC, you're in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it was before the end of the year. I graduated in April, and we were in Afghanistan in November.
So whenever you were getting ready to go and you were doing the workups and then you left for Afghanistan, was there a point where you felt like, okay, like I'm a Recon Marine now, or did that not come till later after the deployment?
So when you first graduate BRC and you get to your team and to your platoon, at least back then, maybe, I don't know if it's changed or not too much, but you really had to earn your salt. Mm-hmm. Like, just graduating BRC didn't really mean a whole lot because you're in a team and in a platoon surrounded by everybody else who has also graduated BRC.
Right.
So
you've done the bare minimum.
Yeah, you've done what we've all done, compared to the rest of the Marine Corps or other branches, other units in the Marine Corps. BRC might mean something, but when you're in a recon platoon, it's like, we've all done that. You're not special just because you're a recon Marine. We all are, So, especially during that workup, if you're a boot, you're a new guy. You have to earn your position on the team every single day.
And this was 2011?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like the heat of the war.
Yeah, it was definitely in full swing at that time, for sure.
So you get to Afghanistan. Walk me through that. How was that?
So getting to Afghanistan, the first, we landed at Camp Leatherneck. It was the big Marine Corps base there. You just go through like all of your normal intel briefings, get updated on what's going on and on the area that you're going to be going to. And we ended up going to an area called Sangin. In my platoon, we were at a patrol base called Patrol Base Transformer. And so we flew out to Sangin from Leatherneck maybe a week or two after we got into country. And we were there at the patrol base really we were just holding battle space. Like we weren't doing any kind of offensive operations or anything like that. We were holding security at the patrol base and then doing security patrols in the local villages in the area.
What did the villagers think of you when you were there?
Most of the villagers were just used to us at that point. Like they were, U.S. and allied forces have been there for 10 years at that point, I think, almost. So most of them were just kind of indifferent towards us.
Yeah.
And the kids are all like super interested in you. They want to come up and talk to you, and like they want to like look through the scope of my gun and shit. It's like, yeah, here you go.
They have this 10-year-old song. Like, this is America right here. This is freedom in your hands.
Yeah. The kids are funny. They'll like come right up to you and like stick their hands in your pockets, like looking for candy and shit. It's like
pull out a hand grenade. They're like,
oh shit. Yeah, but I mean, for the initial part while we were there in Sangin, relatively uneventful for that part, because like I said, we're just doing security patrols every day, enrolling everybody that we would come across into. It's called the bats and hides system. Like anybody we would come across, it was just like take their fingerprints, scan their iris in their eye, get their name and all of that.
Now, are these people that were in the village or that you'd come across out on patrol outside the village?
So when we were on patrol, it was through like multiple villages around the patrol base. So it was really just anybody we came across. We would just go like door to door.
Oh, okay.
And enroll like all of the military age males.
Hey, it's time to pay your taxes. All right, come over here.
I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about. It's weird. Like we can't even comprehend something like that happening. A foreign military occupying your town, your neighborhood, and then just coming to your door and being like, we're going to take your fingerprints, we're going to scan your iris, you're going to give us your name, give us a list of all of your relatives and all of that. Like, what do you do? Where do you live? And then just like, all right, have a good day.
And there's no saying no.
No, there's no saying no.
All these guys are
what are you
armed.
gonna do?
There's a Humvee outside your little hut, your house.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of dystopian to think about it.
Dude, the last time that's probably happened in America was the British.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's in the Constitution that the military can't take over your home.
Yeah.
And so back then, the British were doing that. They were coming door to door, seeing if you were a sympathizer, seeing if you were a rebel.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were doing there. Just like, because they would, I don't recall any specific times this happening with us, but there were occasions where you'd take somebody's fingerprint and it would pop up that they were, associated with the Taliban in some way, and they'd be detained. So really, like, we can't comprehend that here in America, and we just kind of put that in like a separate part of our mind of it's okay to do that because it's over there.
Right.
But if that was us in that situation, I mean, I wouldn't put up with it. I wouldn't be cool with it. Yeah. But that was for the most part, that's what we did.
And so how long were you guys out there in Sangin?
We're in Sangin, I think it was 45 days.
Okay.
About a month and a half. There at PB Transformer. There were a few instances of one of the patrol bases down the road from us was attacked. Wasn't anything too significant. And then we got into a pretty decent little firefight. My first firefight was December of 2011 while we were out on patrol there.
So you were 20 at this time?
I was 19.
19 still?
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Walk me through it.
Yeah, we were out on one of our normal security patrols, going door to door, talking to all the locals, enrolling them in the system. And suddenly we heard a bunch of gunfire, a bunch of machine gun fire. To the north of us, sounded like it was about a click or so away to the north. And this area had been super peaceful up until that point. We'd been there maybe a month or so, and nothing had happened, just totally quiet. Absolutely nothing was going on. So we hear this firefight start, and the north of where we were. So me and my team, we started moving north in the direction of where we were hearing the gunshots. And as we're doing that, we're talking to our patrol base on the radio, trying to figure out what's going on. And they communicated to us that the Afghan local police, who are also operating in that area, were in a gunfight with the Taliban, like I said, about a click north from where we were. So we started moving in their direction to help those guys out, moving through the different, the fields and over the wadis and the canals and things. And as we're moving there, the gunfight stops. The shooting stops from where we had heard it before. But, we're still moving in that direction just to go support those guys. And then we come to this really large field that we had to cross in order to get to the local police. And we moved, did element bounding, alpha element, one element moves across the field. Well, my element, which was Bravo element, holds security. They get across to the other side of the field, and then my element starts moving across the field, and it's me, our corpsmen, a couple other Recon Marines, and 2 of our Afghan National Army attachments with us. And as we're moving across this field, just in the wide open, no cover at all, we get ambushed from probably 200 meters or so to our left, which would have been our west at that point, from the tree line on the edge of that field. And so, I immediately get down on the ground, of course, and I joke around, and I'm like, I've never been, one with the earth, I was at that point in time.
And this is your first firefight?
Yeah. I had never been shot at, had any of those experiences before. So I immediately get down and, become one with the earth. I'm like, I cannot possibly get low enough right now.
Yeah.
Because, we're in the middle of the open. It's a flat field. There's nothing around us.
Oh.
And so, I had the SAW, M249 machine gun. And so after a couple of seconds, I kind of get my bearings, my wherewithal, and realize that we're taking fire from the tree line. And I was able to see, through the trees, kind of some of their positions of where they're shooting at us from. So I just started, laying down suppressive fire with my SAW. And from there, my ATL was in my element with us, and so he called for us to start bounding back. There was a small compound, small house behind us that we were able to bound back from, or to. And in the initial burst of the firefight, our corpsman actually got hit in the foot. He got shot in the foot. But he was okay. It wasn't anything serious, fortunately. But we were able to suppress their positions, bound back, get some cover behind that house that was nearby, and then the guys that had ambushed us, they disengaged, they broke contact, and they just blew their load as fast as they could. They just
that's the SOP what we're doing.
They just dumped everything they had and then bounced. But
now,
so
did you see them in the tree line whenever they first?
No, I didn't see any individuals, but you can just kind of see.
You knew the rounds were coming from there.
Yeah. And they just, like I said, they just because they just blow their load so fast. It was very short. It was a very short firefight, but it's extremely intense.
So you got behind the house. Do you remember how you were feeling? They broke contact, and now your adrenaline's pumping, but then you start calming down. Do you remember that moment about what it was like?
A little bit. I guess in that moment I was still just high adrenaline. Just we're still in a fight in my mind. Even though the shooting had stopped, but we didn't necessarily know at that point in time that they were breaking contact. So we were still, still in the fight. But I guess it was later on. It was that night after we had gotten back to the patrol base, and I remember this very specifically, this very vivid memory. We're back at the patrol base, debriefed, we're done. I lay down in my rack that night, And I remember this very vivid memory of being like, another person, another human being tried to kill me today. Like, that was, that just like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, holy shit.
This is real life.
Yeah, this is real. Like, this isn't like, it's on the news, it's on YouTube, it's on social media. Oh, there's fighting going on over there. It was like, we're real dudes trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
Like, it's intense.
Now, you were in one of those videos that 10-year-old Mike was watching.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it was a crazy realization to just, and even while I was laying in my rack, I was like imagining from his perspective, him down in his fighting position, looking through his sights and seeing me at the end of his sights and pulling the trigger. Yeah. And like, man, that's wild. And I was doing the same thing to him.
Yeah.
You know, and we're just two dudes. We don't even know each other, and we're trying to kill each other.
And you can go from that to then come back to the States, and now you're holding a baby and you're having a barbecue with your family.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a weird thing too, is people, I mean, we're kind of alluding to it earlier with most Americans don't understand, what's going on over there when we're talking about the, enrolling them in the bats and hides. But the same thing goes for just how real, the wars are over there. And in a way, it's obviously a good thing. We're very fortunate not to have had those experiences here. We don't want them here, of course. But we need to realize that this is real shit. These are real people's lives over there.
Yeah. So you have that firefight. Go to Iraq. You have that memory. How was the rest of that deployment? Uneventful? Did you get in any more firefights?
We did get into a few after that. We spent the rest of our time, or the rest of those 45 days or so in Sangin at that patrol base. Went back to Camp Leatherneck, and from Leatherneck we did a few helo raids, just looking for, we were raiding these different compounds looking for IED components or drugs or whatever.
You guys were doing those at night?
One of them was definitely at night. Yeah, I think they were all night inserts.
Okay.
But we were there. We would stay there. We would go land. We would, land in our helos, and we would stay in that area for like 24 to 72 hours. And we'd just occupy a house, stay in that house for a couple of days, and then extract. And we got into a few firefights while we were there. But
anything as impactful as that first ambush?
No, I don't think so. I think that's like the main experience that stands out was the first one. Yeah, that would be definitely the biggest one that struck me the most. Yeah. Because from there it was just, just nothing quite as intense, I guess.
Yeah, and you popped your cherry. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right, this is what we're doing. We're doing this.
Yeah, I remember one of these times, me and one of my buddies, we were on our rest plan. We're occupying a house. In the platoon, we have security set up. So if security is set up and you're on rest, you just go inside and crash, just rack out and get some sleep. And me and one of my buddies were sleeping in one of the rooms, and we wake up and there's a firefight going on outside. The guys are up on the roof shooting, getting shot at, and my buddy just wakes me up. He's like, "Hey, want to go shoot at people?" I'm like, "All right, yeah, let's go." Get up, put my helmet on, and go outside, climb up on the roof, and do our thing for a little while.
And then it's like, how do you go from that to working spreadsheets in civilian life?
Horrible. It's absolutely fucking horrible. From waking up and being like, "Hey, let's go shoot at people," to like, "All right, let's open this Excel doc." And
right. Yeah. So you guys get done with that and you come back. So what was that like getting back? You get back from your first tour, first deployment in Afghanistan. Now you're back.
Getting back from my first deployment was great because it's like like I said earlier, you have to earn your salt. You have to earn your spot on the team every single day. And that never goes away, no matter how long you've been in, no matter how experienced you are, no matter what your rank is or what your position is. You have to earn your spot to be there every single day. But you're not a boot anymore. You know, you're looked at a little bit differently, which felt pretty good. But I mean, it was straight back into work because I immediately went into, going to those schools that we talked about, getting insert complete, going to low level static line and free fall and sear. And then I didn't go to dive until quite a bit later in my career, but that came eventually. So yeah, it was definitely a big switch because as soon as we got back from Afghanistan in 2012, things really started to die down over there, at least for us in the reconnaissance community, because that was the last deployment that 1st Recon Battalion did to Afghanistan. There was no 2nd Recon went after us, but then that was it. So after that, everybody, especially the senior guys who had been to Afghanistan a couple times, maybe Iraq once or twice, they all realized, they saw the writing on the wall. There's not going to be any more combat deployments. And they all got out. There was like a mass exodus of all these senior guys with all this combat experience that just got out in like the, 2012 to 2015, 16. And we all kind of, realized the same thing too. Like nobody's going back to Afghanistan. There's no real combat deployments coming up for Recon. And so we all just transitioned to doing Muse, which is just deploying on a naval ship for 7 months to wherever they send us, which has its pros, but it's definitely not a Afghanistan deployment. That's for sure.
So you did that Afghanistan deployment. Did you go back to the Middle East aside from Muse, or were you just running Muse after that?
It was just Muse after that, but we did stop in the Middle East a few times on those Muse deployments. Jordan, Kuwait, Djibouti, places like that.
I know we were talking, it was a couple weeks ago. We've been in the exact same places in Jordan.
Yeah.
We had like the same pictures of the same church.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a small world, but I mean, yeah, if like, most U.S. service members that have been to those places, it's kind of a handful of places that you can go while you're there. But yeah, small world.
It is, man. So you were starting to do the Muse. So what year did you get out?
I got out last year.
So you got out last year.
2023.
So 2023, so 2011, then you had a period of Muse.
Yeah.
So what started in your mind that you were thinking that you're going to get out? Were you still around 11, 12, thinking this was going to be a lifelong career, or what was that looking like for you?
I was dead set on making it a 20-year career up until about 2021 time frame. Even when I was just doing back-to-back Mute deployments, sitting on a ship going to, Singapore and Sri Lanka and like doing all this useless shit, I was still like, yeah, I'm going to do 20 years of this, because at that point I was 100% still like a true believer in everything that our military was doing, everything our country was doing overseas. I believed in it 100%. And so I was like, I don't care. Like I'm here to serve my country. I'll go wherever they want me to go and do whatever they want me to do. And if it means doing Muse and training the Kuwaitis, how to do whatever, then that's what I'll do. So there was, for most of the time period that I was just doing those deployments, I was 100% set on I was going to do 20 years as a Reconnaissance Marine.
So what changed for you?
A lot changed. And I think there were definitely some changes that happened in the military, but in other ways I realized the military wasn't what I thought it was. And I guess some of the changes that happened in the military, which everybody talks about, but it's 100% true, is all the DEI stuff. And even if you're not directly impacted by that in your particular job in the Marine Corps, I think it just says a lot about what our military is all about, like what it stands for and what it's really promoting. So there was that caused me to start asking a lot of questions. And another big factor for me was the COVID vaccine. Yeah. They mandated the COVID vaccine, and I was 100% dead set against that from the start.
Right.
So I submitted a religious exemption. I think I waited like a year to get an answer back, and they, of course, denied it. So I submitted my my rebuttal or whatever it was called, and that goes to Headquarters Marine Corps. And in a couple weeks, that was denied as well. So from there, at least how it was explained to me, how it was working. And it's interesting because other people who have had a similar experience have described something totally different that was told to them. But for me, how it worked was I had to go into my commanding officer's office, and he, gave me a lawful order, quote unquote, that I needed to take the vaccine because it was mandated by the Department of Defense. Because they can't just, again, how it was explained to me, they can't just kick you out for disobeying an order.
Right.
They have to establish a pattern of I can't think of the word, not disobedience, but they have to establish a pattern of you disobeying orders or whatever.
Insubordination.
Yeah, yes, that's it.
That word haunted me through high school.
Yeah.
Every week just getting suspended for insubordination.
Yeah. That's the word. Yeah, they have to establish a pattern. So after all my requests for an exemption were denied, you go into my commanding officer's office, tells me I have to take the vaccine, and I say no. And so I sign documentation saying that I'm, disobeying the order. And then the next day, you go back into his office again, says you have to take the vaccine. I say no. I sign the paper saying that I'm disobeying a lawful order. Now you've done it twice, and they have a pattern of insubordination. So as soon as that happened, they started the process and the paperwork to separate me from the Marine Corps, to kick me out. So I was going through the whole process. I was checking out of my unit. I was getting everything signed off. I was getting ready to turn in all my gear.
And this is 2021?
This was September of 22. I believe it's 22.
Oh, wow.
So it may have been 21. I don't even remember now.
So almost 2 years into it, and they're still just pushing you out.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was 22. So, yeah, I'm going through the process to get separated from the Marine Corps, and this is all happening over the course of a couple of weeks. And I'm stationed out in Okinawa, Japan at the time, and I was about 2 weeks away or so from flying back to the States and finalizing everything to get kicked out. And a federal judge back here in the States ordered the Department of Defense to stop separating people, that they couldn't do it. It wasn't legal or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
So I was 2 weeks away or so from getting kicked out when the judge was like, nope, the Department of Defense has to stop everything. And then that started a whole series of legal whatever, going on with the DOD and the vaccine mandates. And I just wrote out the next year of my contract until my contract was done and got out on my own terms.
And so at that point, you're like, these guys don't give a shit. They're about to kick me out for this. I'm done.
That was one of the realizations I had was, people told me well, you can stay in now. They're not kicking you out. You can re-enlist. You're allowed to re-enlist. It's like it never happened. You're fine. And I'm like, the highest levels of the organization that I'm a part of,
that you dedicated your life to.
Yes, that I dedicated my life to, have made it very clear they don't want me in this organization. They don't want me. They don't want people like me. They don't want people that think like me, that have the same values I do. They do not want us in this organization. Why am I going to continue the rest of my career following their orders? So that was a huge point for me, where it kind of dawned on me, this is not the organization that they make it out to be.
Yeah.
And I heard from a lot of guys, people who I like and respect, who were higher ranking than me, who all said that they respected what I was doing for not taking it. They admired it. None of them said anything though. They would tell me behind closed doors that they respected what I was doing. I'm like, well, it'd be nice if
one of you guys would back me up.
Yeah. And I mean, in one sense, I get it, and I don't hold it against them. They, people have families, and they don't want to, lose all of that.
Yeah.
So I don't blame them for it, but it's mostly the much higher echelons that I have a problem with. It's really not the lower ranks, because I mean, the lower rank, you don't have really any say in what's going on.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's the higher echelons that I realize they are being very intentional about getting a certain type of individual out of the military.
Yep.
So why would I continue to follow their orders?
And it seems like, especially over the past, I don't know, maybe past 10 years, at least from what I saw from the Navy and the Marine Corps, not the Marine Corps as much, but definitely the Navy, they're becoming this bureaucratic political entity.
Yeah.
They're running it like a business almost.
Yeah.
Gone are the days of the 90s, early 2000s of getting the job done, mission readiness. Now they're focusing on COVID vaccines, adhering to DEI policies.
100%. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people are more concerned about their careers than anything else. And it's awesome when you come across, especially when you come across an officer who doesn't give a shit about his career and he's just all about his guys,
Yeah.
you know, and he's got his guys back 100%. I've fortunately been privileged enough to have worked for guys like that, that were great. But you're right. It is just becoming, I mean, like you said, just this huge bureaucratic machine. And not only do most people not have the desire or the will to push back against it, even if they do, there's nothing that they can really do about it.
No.
You know, there's not much you can do. It's the big green machine, and it's going to roll on, and it will run you over. Like,
You're going to get the green weenie.
Oh, yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah, it is going to run through you.
You're going to take it.
Yeah. So you can get out, or you're going to get ran through.
So, I mean, and a lot of guys got pushed out. And that's the crazy thing with this COVID vaccine mandate. They were pushing out Recon Marines. They were pushing out SEALs, guys with tenure, guys with multiple deployment. They did not care.
Yeah. It makes it seem like it was very intentional. You know, like I said, they were trying to get a very particular type of person out.
And that is almost, you've seen it in the news where they're letting illegal aliens in some areas join police departments.
Really?
Now, whether I've seen this, and now whether they can be armed or not is, I'm not entirely sure. And I might be wrong about this. From what I've seen, is that some departments were letting either people on visas or illegals go through a process to join a police department. And so that comes to the same idea of getting certain types of people, patriotic people out of the military, people that think for themselves, are willing to stand up for what they believe in. Then you do that with local forces, local police departments, things here that don't have the same American values, these ideals of right and wrong, the Constitution. They'll really follow orders and say, hey, that person said something on Twitter that the party doesn't like, go in there and arrest them. You don't need a warrant. They'll go do it.
They'll do it because they owe the government everything, because it's this government that's allowing them to be here. But there's an argument to be made that has been made to me, and I get where people are coming from, even though I disagree with it. But they would say, if all of the good people get out of the military, then our military is just, we're basically just handing it over to these people. You know, so they would argue we need good people to stay in, to kind of deal with it, to put up with it, so that we can keep some good people in the military. But I mean, my only response to that would be what we said earlier. Like, that you cannot change the military, especially from the bottom up.
No.
It is a top-down organization, and the only way to change it is from the top. And, you know, you could have all the best intentions in the world and be a great person, but you're not going to change it.
And I kind of went through these phases too. You join for the reasons, like when I joined, for the patriotic reasons, serving my country. I was happily bought into this idea of, I want to deploy, I want to go to war. If I die before I'm 30, I'll do it for my country. Like, that's drinking the Kool-Aid. I was all in.
Yeah.
And you slowly get disillusioned out of that. And so, like, a couple years ago, if somebody would have told me this happened, somebody would have told me 9/11 was an inside job, or that the government had a hand in either allowing 9/11 to happen, or they were negligible about it, I would have fought that person. I'd be like, you fucking communist.
Yeah.
But now someone tells that to me, especially after COVID, I'm like, I believe it.
Yeah.
I could see the government doing that.
Yeah. 100%. And that, like I said, there are several factors that contributed to why I got out. It's, you know, the DEI, the mandates, and just our general government's foreign policy that I started to kind of have my eyes opened up to. And it started for me with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. because that happened like right at the tail end of the vaccine mandates. And it's kind of interesting, like that just totally took over the news cycle. Went from the pandemic is going to kill everybody to now the only thing we talk about is Russia invading Ukraine, and COVID just disappeared. But it was interesting to me, there was a whole group of, whether they were like right-leaning or conservative type people on social media and in the news, who I felt like were 100% spot on with COVID. They were against the vaccine mandates, and they were solid on all that. But as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine and our government's narrative became Putin is Hitler and Russia is going to take over all of Europe, and then we're going to have to go to war with Russia, all of these people that I thought were awake, if you want to call it that, to the fact that our government is lying to us and pushing propaganda, all of them just immediately fell in line with that media narrative of like, yes, Russia is evil, we should go to war with Russia. And I was like, well, I thought we all just agreed that the government was lying to us for the last 2 years, and now we're all just buying their narrative on this 100%. So that led me to dig into Russia and NATO expansion over the last few decades. And I mean, I came to the conclusion that NATO and NATO's expansion is the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine. And people can have their criticisms or disagreements with Putin and the Russians. You don't have to love them and think they're great, but there's no question that this was a provoked war. We provoked Russia into doing it, and you hear it all the time in the news that this was unprovoked. That's all they ever say. Yeah, it was unprovoked. But if you look into the history of Russia and Ukraine, you look into the history of NATO expansion in Eastern Europe, this has been going on for a long time, where I think the U.S. and NATO have been trying to prompt Russia into doing something like this.
It's almost like America benefits from war.
It's almost, yeah. It's this crazy thing. It's this crazy thing that this great president and a supreme Allied commander during World War II warned us about in his speech when he left the Oval Office, Dwight Eisenhower, in the military-industrial complex. Yep. They all make money off of war. Yep. And the same thing can be said for Afghanistan.
And when you try to stop that war, they JFK you, or they try and Trump you.
Yeah. I mean, Trump has his pros and cons. I like Trump a lot. It doesn't mean I agree with him on everything, but one thing that he's really good on is he is against all of the wars. He wants to end the wars in the Middle East. He wants to end the war in Ukraine. And I think that has a huge impact on why the, whatever you want to call him, the deep state or the whatever, they hate him. They hate him because he's against their number one thing, and that is perpetual war, nonstop.
And you start to at least I did. I started to realize a couple of years ago that there's this uniparty going on. It's probably been there forever. But I started paying more attention to politics and doing more history. I looked into the NATO expansion too, because you're right. It went right from take this vaccine, trust the science, the government loves you, but fuck you. You can't leave your house. And then we realized that, they're lying to us. Like, our government hates us. They want us to fall in line. They want us to buy, be a consumer, and do what they say. So we all realized that they were lying to us. And then you're right. The Ukraine war comes on, and I remember they start pushing all that. And like you were saying, they said unprovoked attack. And when they're pushing that on the news, I instantly, now whatever's on CNN and Fox News, the opposite's probably true. Yeah. Whatever they're saying. Yeah. And so, you look into it and you realize whenever the Berlin Wall fell, they're like, NATO will not expand 1 inch to the east. And now they've traveled hundreds of miles across all of Eastern Europe, right onto the border of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. If you just reverse the roles, you just reverse the scenario. If China was a part of the world's largest military alliance, which NATO is the world's largest military alliance, if China was a part of the world's largest military alliance in South America, for example, and they were slowly moving further and further north towards our border, and then they finally started meddling in Mexico's government, trying to get Mexico to join the military alliance, nobody is going to sit here and tell me that we're not going to do something about that.
No, and we already have a past experience, the Cuban Missile Crisis with
100%.
Cuba.
Yeah. It's the same exact. We almost started World War III with the Soviet Union because they wanted to put missiles in Cuba right off our coast. And now we're doing the same thing to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And they pretend like it's unprovoked.
It is weird, and it's scary. I have faith in humanity, and then I lose it. I have faith, and then I lose it. Because whenever the vaccines and COVID were happening, and I was pushing back against all this like you were, and even my family was like, you get the vaccine, you got to do this, you got to do this. And I feel like everyone around me, or most people around me, were just blind. They weren't reading history. They weren't looking into it. And then the tail end of COVID, those people start waking up. And you're like, oh, man, everybody's thinking for themselves. Like, we're breaking out of the matrix. This is happening. And then Ukraine comes along. Russia comes along. And those people just slip right back into it.
Yeah.
And then especially out here in California, I noticed you see houses around here everywhere that had no flags. No American flags, no nothing. And now they're only flying Ukrainian flags. You're so brainwashed that you're in America. You don't have no American flags in your home, but you're flying a Ukraine flag off your balcony, and you have Ukraine flags on your stickers or on your car. It's a scary world, man, about how easily people are manipulated.
Yeah, and it's like they have a different message for every different group of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's a particular group of people that the COVID message worked on, but that message didn't work on another group. But then they push Russia is Putin is Hitler or whatever, and that message works on the other group. You know, so they'll tailor their message to get everybody in one way or another.
Have you seen what's going on recently outside of Israel?
Yeah,
They're moving the carrier group right outside of Israel.
yeah, I know we have a ton of naval assets over there.
And it looks like Israel might be dragging us into a war with Iran.
Yeah, so when you're talking about people flying Ukrainian flags, it upsets me, it bothers me when any American flies any foreign flag. And that is especially true of Israel.
Yep.
Because that for some reason seems to be totally acceptable to fly a foreign nation's flag in our federal buildings, like the Capitol building, for example. And I don't think there's any question that Israel has a huge influence on our government and on our government's foreign policy. And we're seeing that play out right now.
I think we were talking about AIPAC.
Yeah. Congressman Thomas Massey had a really good interview with Tucker Carlson talking about AIPAC, and they're like the biggest Israeli lobbying group. And from what he says, pretty much every Republican congressman, and probably a lot of Democrats too, these most issues really aren't divided on party lines. I think there might be some differences between the parties, but I agree with you. It's a uniparty for the most part.
Yeah.
There's this foreign country that has this major lobbying firm that supports all of our congressmen in their campaigns, donates to their campaigns, and funds everything they do. And
they openly brag about it.
Yeah,
you can go
out in the open.
You can go on AIPAC's website, and it'll show how much money they've donated to certain champions of Israel. And you're like, okay, let's flip this script. Like, if they're a foreign nation. Yeah. Whatever your opinions about them are, they're a foreign nation. So let's say, if England, which has totally different values, different systems, different ways of doing business than America, if England had this lobby that was funding millions of dollars to our congressmen to influence policies that would benefit England's energy supply. If England needs to go to war with someone, it would benefit our policies to help back them up. Just backdoor policy control of a foreign nation on our congressmen. And people are bragging about that. And if you point that out about AIPAC, they attack you.
Yeah, you're instantly called anti-Semitic. It's no different, because the right does this all the time. Like, the so-called conservatives will do this all the time, where they'll call anybody that criticizes Israel or has an issue with the amount of influence they have over our government, they'll call them anti-Semitic. But they'll also accuse the left of being woke for calling everybody racist or bigots, but they apply the same exact thing to anybody that criticizes Israel. They just label you as an anti-Semite, and they think, if you're a bad person, we can just dismiss any of the things you're saying now. But I completely agree. It doesn't matter what country it is. We should not be allowing any foreign nation to influence our country's policies in any way. And this is like the core of America First, is our government exists for us. The U.S. government exists for the American people, and it should only do things that benefit us as Americans. At no point should what is best for Israel, what is best for Ukraine, or anybody else, at no point should that question ever be factored into the equation.
And it almost makes you wonder, because just now with social media, I feel like these things like AIPAC and other foreign lobbyists and domestic lobbyists, whether that's big tobacco, big pharma, money should be taken out of politics. But if we're looking at AIPAC, that makes you wonder about how much of our policy in the Middle East in the late 90s, early 2000s were influenced by that.
Yeah, I think our foreign policy, our government's foreign policy in the Middle East was heavily influenced by Israel and ensuring the security of Israel, especially when it comes to the war on terror. Because a lot of people might not be aware, and I know we've talked about it in the past, there was a policy paper called A Clean Break, and it was written by national security advisors in the U.S. government in 1996, and it was a paper that was written to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. And it was laying out a strategy for the Middle East for how to increase Israel's security, and a part of it was overthrowing Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
You can look this up right now. It's there.
It is, again, these weren't just like nobodies. They were high-level national security advisors in our government speaking with the Prime Minister of Israel, saying, the way we help Israel's security is overthrowing Saddam Hussein. This was in 1996. And then, of course, in 2003, we invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam. So that was 100%. Like you said, you can go read this paper. Anybody can read it online. We invaded Iraq for Israel.
Yep. There was 100%. No weapons of mass destruction. That was a lie.
Yeah.
And you talk to people, or I've talked to people that are from Kuwait and Iraq and that area. And a lot of the Kuwaitis, they didn't like Saddam, but they said Saddam was good for the Middle East because you had the Shias and the Sunnis. And there was this difference with Saddam, but with Saddam, there was at least structure.
Yeah.
There was structure, there was balance. It was a threat. He was a threat to other nations, but Iraq became what it is today because of the toppling of Saddam and that structure that they had.
100%. And that's the thing, is we try to impose our values on all these other countries around the world. We think Western liberal democracy is somehow going to work in an Islamic country in the Middle East. It's not. Like, the reason why guys like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi in Libya, the reason why they kind of rule with an iron fist is because that's what it takes over there in that culture to keep things in line, to keep things structured and in order. And when we overthrow that, it just causes chaos. That's exactly what's happening.
We haven't understood that. We don't learn that lesson.
No, not at all.
Going into Vietnam, that happened in Vietnam. In South Vietnam, they tried to install like a very westernized president, or however you want to call it, that I was reading about. And so I think in Vietnam they're Buddhist.
I think so.
Is the main religion?
Yeah.
So they installed this westernized Vietnamese president who, instead of the traditional attire, he wore a Western style suit and tie, and he was demanding that people start converting to Christianity in this area, and that they were trying to get away from this Buddhist ideology. And so we have this trying to push this into these areas to spread the dominion, but that just makes these people hate us.
100%, because different people in different cultures, they have different values, and so they have to be governed differently. We can't just assume that what works for us here in our country is going to work over there. And I would argue this isn't even working here. Just look around. I don't think it works anywhere. But
no, man. Speaking of which, speaking of stuff not working anywhere, what do you think about the assassination attempt on Trump?
Well, there's a lot to be said about that, I think. One, like we were saying earlier, I do think a big part of it is his stance on the wars and being against the wars.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, with that, what do you mean by that? Is that, did he speak specifically about with Israel or Russia?
I think it's probably more related to Russia and Ukraine. I would disagree with some of Trump's views on Israel. I think ultimately he doesn't want the fighting to continue over there. Mm-hmm. But I think he's a little bit more pro-Israel than he should be. But let me, first of all, just backing up a little bit with the Trump assassination, I don't think it was just a lone shooter. I don't think a 20-year-old kid with no training and no experience gets that close to a former president of the United States with a rifle and gets off several shots.
150 yards?
130, something like that, yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's too early to say for certain what likely happened, but I don't think that some 20-year-old kid pulls that off by himself.
No, and I was watching an interview the other day and having some apparatus like Blackwater run his security. Because at that point, how can you trust Department of Homeland Security has taken over Secret Service?
Yeah.
So how those people are actively persecuting him. If I'm not mistaken, the guy, one of the FBI agents that was in charge of investigating this assassination attempt was the exact same FBI agent that was in charge of the raid on Mar-a-Lago.
Wow.
So how can you trust these government agencies who on one hand are trying to falsely persecute you or chase you down to protect you?
And there's a lot of connections that could be made to the JFK assassination as well, which, I mean, I think you've read a lot more about that than I have, but I think there's no question that JFK was not on good terms with our intelligence community for similar reasons. They were trying to push him to go to war with Cuba. Mm-hmm. They were trying to push him to go to war with Vietnam, and he was completely against it. He would not allow it, and then, you know, they took him out ultimately.
And then what's crazy about that is, so JFK fired the director of the CIA.
Yeah.
I believe it's Robert Engel. I might be getting that wrong. But so JFK fired the director of the CIA. And then whenever he was assassinated a couple years later, who's in charge of the Warren Commission? The former CIA director that he fired. What are you talking about? This guy has all the bias against JFK. And then he appointed his brother, JFK appointed Bobby Kennedy, the attorney general at the time, to oversee reining in the CIA's power.
Yeah.
They wanted to bring their budget back under control, rein them in. And so whenever JFK is assassinated, he's no longer the attorney general. And then he's not a threat to the system. A couple years later, when he starts running for president, he's getting popularity, he's getting momentum. That's the only other guy who has an interest in reining in the CIA, knows what these agencies are capable of. He gets shot in the kitchen in a hotel. And even RFK Jr. talks about this. There were 2 or 3 undercover plainclothes CIA agents that were in that kitchen that weren't supposed to be there. What are they doing there? It's weird.
It's a little weird.
It's weird.
It's a little weird. Have you seen that clip of Senator Chuck Schumer? I think he's being interviewed by Rachel Maddow.
No.
It's back from, it's like 2015, 2016 when Trump was first running for president. And Trump had just tweeted something about the CIA or the intelligence community or something negative against the intelligence community. And Rachel Maddow asked Chuck Schumer about it. And he says, like, Trump is doing something really stupid by going after the intelligence community because they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you.
I think I've heard about that.
He was like the most senior ranking senator in the country at the time. And he's like, a president or a future president better not talk badly about the intelligence community because they will get you.
And no one since JFK has openly called for the reform of the intelligence agencies.
No
sitting president.
Not at all. And there you have Trump, who's very critical of the FBI. I don't know if he specifically talked about the CIA. He probably has.
He's probably too smart. I don't think I've ever heard him say anything about the CIA. Smarter than we are.
Yeah. They break down the door.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so when you look at like things like that, what Chuck Schumer says and what Trump is saying, he clearly does not get along with the intelligence community. And then just from a tactics perspective of looking at the Trump assassination, I've never worked with the Secret Service or in personal security details or anything like that, but there's some basic tactics that apply no matter what kind of mission you're doing. And I cannot comprehend how anyone would not have that roof secured. It's the most obvious place for anybody to be. And the Secret Service just tries to pass the buck on to the local law enforcement and say, well, the local law enforcement was responsible for that building. But they don't have the training that the Secret Service does. Why would you pass off the most obvious place of where somebody might set up to the guys with less training? That doesn't make any sense to me. And one of the craziest things, because I trust the local law enforcement guys a lot more than I do the federal law enforcement agencies. But the local law enforcement has been saying that they had no radio communications with the Secret Service for the entire day. They didn't have a direct line of communication with them.
Really?
Which is bizarre to me. It doesn't matter what kind of operation you're doing. If you're going out on a patrol, you're doing a raid, or you're just holding security, and there's other joint units out there operating in the same area you are, everybody knows that everyone needs to be able to talk to each other. This is like basic stuff. So the fact that the Secret Service had no way of communicating with the local law enforcement is just beyond me of how anyone could have allowed that to happen.
Yeah, and you look in the timelines because there's so much. I mean, we have phones now. Everybody is a journalist, and with JFK, that Zapruder film, that film probably wasn't supposed to exist. And if that film didn't exist, we would have no video record of what happened to JFK.
Yeah,
there would be the official narrative, and that would be it.
Yep.
Because there's nothing to be caught on camera. And you're looking at this, and some people are saying that they were pointing this guy out for like 20 minutes on the roof. 2 cops within viewpoint of the counter snipers that were up on the roof behind Trump.
Yeah, that's just bizarre. I mean, there's so many questions that are yet to be answered. And when it comes to the JFK assassination, that was decades ago, and we still don't have all the answers. There's still gaps that haven't been filled. So I don't think we're ever going to have all of the answers to the Trump assassination attempt either. But what I will say is so far the official narrative doesn't make any sense.
Not at all.
I don't think anyone with any common sense is believing what the FBI is saying about this.
No, and I realized you were there. I was giving like little lectures on the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
And I realized one of the most impactful videos that you can show people to not trust their government is the unedited Zapruder film, which shows the assassination of JFK. You want to watch the video of a sitting president get us at the hands of arguably the government or allowing that to happen, you watch that video. And if they can do that to a president, they can do that. They've done that. They openly talk about that. They do that to presidents, leaders in other nations all around the globe.
Yeah.
Regularly. There's a whole department in these agencies dedicated just to political assassinations. They can touch anybody.
Yeah, they can touch anybody. They can go anywhere. That comes full circle back to Ukraine. The CIA and the State Department was behind a coup in Ukraine in 2014, which is a major reason why we have the war going on over there right now.
And who was the point man in charge of that?
Who was that?
Who was the vice president?
Oh, yeah.
Joe Biden? Joe Biden was the point man for Ukraine in 2014.
Yes, small world. Isn't that funny? You know, and Hunter Biden's got all these like weird business dealings in Ukraine.
Weird. It's weird.
It's weird stuff. Just coincidence.
Yeah. Don't look into it. There's nothing there.
Yeah, I think over the next, weeks and months and even years, more information will come out about the Trump assassination, but we may not be able to ever connect every single dot like we can't with JFK, even though everybody who's looked into it at all kind of knows what was going on there. Even if you don't have like definitive proof, it's like everyone can figure it out.
And it's the crazy world that we're living in. I remember I was talking to my mom about it, and it's just how we're all blasted with information. We're all just trying to survive. We don't have time to care. Most people don't have time to care. And it was an interview with RFK Jr., and he was on this interview, millions of views, and he believes, I believe the CIA had a hand in killing my father and my uncle. And I call my mom, and I'm like, Mom, RFK Jr., a guy running for president, just said he believed the intelligence agencies had a hand in killing his family. Like that solves the question of JFK. She's like, oh, that's cool. It's crazy. That's it. What are you doing for dinner? Like, what is wrong with everybody?
It's wild. I mean, that's just, like you said, it's just like a flood of information 24/7, and people just don't have the bandwidth to grasp all of this. But for anybody that doesn't think the CIA or our intelligence communities would do something like this, like be behind killing JFK, be behind trying to kill Trump, conducting coups in foreign countries, all they have to do is look up Operation Northwoods. Have you read about that at all?
I have, but tell me about it.
Operation Northwoods, this ties into JFK because it was during his presidency, was an attempt, it was a plan by the CIA to get us into a war with Cuba. And so the CIA came up with this idea that they were going to conduct a bunch of false flag terrorist attacks against U.S. citizens. This was our intelligence community, our government, saying they were going to, I think they wanted to sink a cruise liner. They, believe it or not, wanted to crash a plane into a building. This was in the 60s.
60s, weird.
Yeah. And carry out a bunch of other small, like, terrorist attacks and make it look like the Cubans had done.
These false flag operations.
Yeah, false flag, make it look like Cuba had attacked us to get JFK on board to get the American people on board to say, hey, we got to go to war with Cuba. The director of the CIA signed off on it and approved it. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, they were all in on it. They signed off on it. They approved it. And then they brought it to JFK, and he said no. Thank God.
Wow.
But it was literally that close to actually being carried out that it just needed one more signature, the president, JFK, and that would have actually taken place.
And these are actual declassified documents.
These are declassified documents.
You can go look up right now.
Yep, you can look them up right now, Operation Northwoods, where the CIA planned to carry out false flag terrorist attacks against American citizens to prompt a war with Cuba.
I'm sure they've changed.
That was then. That was then.
A new agency.
Everybody should get second chances. All right, guys.
That's crazy. So I didn't know all the in-depth of that Operation Northwoods, but it's funny you brought up blaming it on the Cubans. Because when I was investigating, I did a whole paper on JFK. When I was investigating the assassination of JFK, one of the arguments that were made in this book was that the initial plan, that whatever agency had a hand in it, was to tie Lee Harvey Oswald to, they have a term called bumping. So like you have a undercover agent who will cross paths with someone and try and enter their inner circle, influence them with certain ideas, and like bump them into other people, and it seems like it's all natural. And so the plan was to bump Lee Harvey Oswald to these Cuban militants before the assassination. And this is what I read. And the argument is saying that they were going to have him as the fall guy and say that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK acting on behalf of Cuba to instigate this war with Cuba. But I don't know if that narrative fell through, if it didn't work. But
what is their official narrative for why Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly was a lone gunman or whatever they say? I don't even know what they claim his motivation was.
So, if I'm not mistaken, from what I remember, they said that he was a prime Marine and he had communist sympathies.
Yeah.
So you just look into this. I forgot the name of his wife, but this is during the time of the Soviet Union. I might be wrong. I got a messed up brain. But from what I remember, Lee Harvey Oswald married this woman from the Soviet Union. This is the height of the Cold War. He was able to, I believe, him and his wife travel to the Soviet Union and come back untouched. So they weren't interrogated. They weren't held as a person of interest. They were, and I may be wrong, but that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Unless someone's
especially
allowing
during that
that.
time.
Yeah, that doesn't happen unless someone's allowing that person to travel to the Soviet Union and back. There's something going on there. And so I think the narrative was that he was frustrated with JFK's policies. There might have been communist sympathies there. I'd have to read into what the official narrative. I've dismissed the official narrative so much I don't even know it.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't even care what you have to say. I know it's not true.
Yeah.
You know, I only want to hear the official narrative so I can know, all right, that's not what happened.
That's a fucking lie.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see once they do their investigation and all of that, I'm curious to see what the official story will be for why this guy tried to kill Trump. Because it's already a weird story where he didn't have any social media presence, supposedly. He was a registered Republican but had donated to a liberal Democratic organization. I don't know where they're going to try to go with it, what they're going to try to say the reason was. But like you said, we know it's not true. So
yeah. And I try not to be pessimistic about it, but I think just like with the past election with Trump, I remember I stayed up for that election.
Yeah.
I had watched the first time Trump was elected president. I remember I was in the barracks and it was on the TV in like the barracks hut, and I was walking by. This is how I didn't give a shit about politics at this time. Trump got elected. I saw it on the TV as I was walking through the barracks hut, and I was like talking to the duty, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Trump got elected. Cool." Didn't care.
Yeah.
And I stayed up for the last election, and I remember it being like 1 a.m. And they're like, "Oh, we haven't tallied all the votes. We don't know who won yet." And I'm like, "That's weird. How do you not know who won?" And then the next day you have this spike. You look at the graph. Like 4 a.m. you have, I think it was like 100,000, around that number of votes, came in all for Biden.
Mm-hmm.
That is statistically impossible, that not a single one of those, say, 100,000 votes, they all came in for Biden. That's impossible. And that is what he needed to correct this arc, this trend that they were on for Trump to win, to correct that arc for him to become president. I remember seeing that in the weeks that happened. I'm like, guys, this is huge. Like, surely Fox News has our back, and they're just not going to let this slide, and they're going to call that there's something fishy going on. They didn't. Nobody called it, and everyone just moved on because the media was controlled, and they just kept pushing news stories. I feel like that's what's going to happen with this assassination.
I think it's already started to happen. They're barely even talking about it anymore.
Yeah.
They've just moved on to Harris and whatever else. Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That.
They're like, hey, let's start a war. If we can't kill if we can't assassinate him, let's start a war with Iran.
I mean, that's a fair point. It's interesting timing. If they were hoping that Trump would just be dead by now and they could just move on, or they start a war, before he's even in office.
And what's scary, you're following like Ukraine. Zelensky, it might have changed by now, but last I looked into it, Zelensky said he's not stepping down and he's not holding an election because of the war. Unless I think America funds it or something happens like that.
They were supposed to have an election last year in Ukraine, but because of the war, supposedly they didn't hold an election.
And I forgot what I was reading, but it's scary to think about. So we have the Constitution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have judges, district attorneys, Supreme Court justices, if you have all these people that interpret the Constitution very loosely, that don't really enforce it, it just becomes a piece of paper. So if we go down this rabbit hole of if, say, a race war happens or a civil war happens that tears apart the country. I'm going on a different tangent here.
It's all right.
But if I sat and tried to think about this, and I forgot the book I was reading, but it talks about the Constitution is here to protect the people. The Bill of Rights. That is the big roadblock to destroying our liberties and our freedom. Now, how would someone go about getting rid of the Constitution? Well, one of the ways you could easily do that is if you instigate so much identity politics, so much infighting, that a controlled civil war happens. An instigated, controlled civil war happens. You crush that, whether that's Washington, D.C., whatever that is. You have this big break, this civil war happens, whatever that might look like, whether it's on a large scale or on a small scale. That then justifies whoever wins, presumably the deep state would win, to then rewrite, hey, guys, that didn't work. The founding fathers did the best they could. It got us to this point. We need to rewrite it. We need to become something new. And then they can write a new constitution. They can rewrite the new laws after the Civil War or something like that happens. And I remember reading that book and I was talking about that, and it just blew my mind.
Yeah, like you're saying, we can have a foundation for how our system is supposed to work, what the checks and balances are supposed to be. But if you get certain people in certain positions, they can start to change that and alter that and influence things to move in a certain direction. And I think that's true of any system that you can have. Mm-hmm. Any system is prone to corruption. No form of government is going to be perfect. Some are better than others, obviously. But what it ultimately comes down to is the people that are in these positions of power that are supposed to be upholding our values and protecting our system and putting their own citizens first. And so I think that's the main problem that we're running into, is whether or not it's the best system or the system could be improved. I think the number one problem is the people that are in these positions and the values that they have and what they believe in, because they believe, the people who are the elites, the deep state, whatever we want to call it, they believe things that are totally different than we do. They have totally different values and different priorities than we do. And so to me, it's obviously it's important to have a good system that functions properly, but ultimately it's the values and the beliefs of the people that are in the positions of power that actually makes a difference.
You're definitely right. And you've heard of the World Economic Forum, right?
Oh yeah.
So super great organization. Don't look into them at all. They're here to help us.
Yeah.
The World Economic Forum, who's the guy that heads that?
Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab. So you can look this up. 5-minute Google break from TikTok, and you can learn a lot of history. But you look into Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, they are lobbying and funding extremely far left district attorneys, judges all across the United States of America to get them elected. Because that's what they realize, that if you can have someone that is so far to the left away from just the traditional value, because what is the middle? What is conservatism? What is the middle? It's just sticking to the traditional values of America, the ideals of American democracy. But if you can get someone so far to the left of that, say in San Francisco, that won't persecute crime, that has these different views and interpretations of the Constitution, it doesn't matter who writes the laws. It doesn't matter what the Constitution is. If they're sending all of this money to get these people elected in these local and state governments, that are then going to undermine the country.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you mentioned it earlier, getting the money out of politics. I don't know how you do that exactly. I'm not going to pretend like
you probably need an army for that.
Yeah, probably. That's probably what it would take. But I think ultimately what it is going to take is not just fixing the system in such a way where we can try to prevent these things from happening the way they are right now. But I think even more importantly, it's changing the values of our culture, because the people that are in these positions of power are products of our culture. And our culture is secular, it's atheist, and explicitly anti-Christian. And so when you have people who have those belief systems that are running the show, what else would we expect other than what we have right now?
Speaking of anti-Christian, I wanted to get your opinion and your take on the Paris Olympics, the opening ceremonies that recently happened on the world stage, viewed by millions. Did you see that?
I saw clips of it, yeah.
What's your take on it?
Well, it's definitely gone through the news cycle of exactly what it was. It was explicitly intended to mock Christ and Christianity. I don't think there's any question about that. The organizers, I think, released some statement trying to backpedal a little bit, but I think anybody that watched it knows it was very clearly mocking the Last Supper, which is, of course, everyone knows, an incredibly important event in the Christian faith. And it was interesting that it was this weird combination of a mockery of the Last Supper with the Greek god Dionysus on the table, that guy that was all painted blue and all that. That was supposed to be the Greek god Dionysus, who is the god of wine or something like that, which is interesting because it was at the Last Supper that Christ says, this wine is my blood. So that's the point at which he kind of instituted the Eucharist, the bread being his flesh, the wine being his blood, and then they combine this weird mockery of that event with this pagan god who kind of represents wine and drunkenness and that sort of thing. So it's interesting, especially coming from a place like France that is historically a Christian nation. But I think it is indicative of where not just France or Europe, but Western civilization is as a whole, and how far it's fallen away from its Christian roots.
So you're Orthodox Christian, right?
That's right.
I remember we went to church together.
Yeah.
And I'd grown up Baptist, I guess between Baptist and Methodist. And the beautiful Orthodox church is beautiful. And I remember going in there, and this is so much different than any westernized Christianity I've experienced in my lifetime.
Yeah.
What are the big differences between, you think about westernized Christianity and Orthodox Christianity?
Well, there's a lot of different angles you can look at it from. I mean, one is you just can look at the cultures of the places that are traditional Eastern Orthodox and the cultures of places that are Western Christians, like Catholics and Protestants, like France being a perfect example of that. I don't think you would ever have any kind of display or event like what was at the Olympics opening ceremony in a traditionally Orthodox country. I don't think that would happen at all.
Like Russia.
Yeah. Russia's not going to put up with it. They're Orthodox. The Russian Orthodox Church is huge, and I don't think they would tolerate that at all. And there's actually an example of that, because the Olympics were in Sochi, Russia, in 2014. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the band called Pussy Riot.
No.
So they're a Russian punk feminist band.
Definitely would have never heard of that.
Nope. I guess nobody's knows about Russian punk feminist bands. But
hey, you lost me at feminist.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I know about them is a lot of people speculate that they're like a U.S. State Department funded kind of thing.
No way.
To subvert Russian culture.
We would do something like that?
That's what they say. That's what they're saying. But this band, Pussy Riot, during the Olympics, not during the opening ceremony, but during the Olympics in Russia, they went out in front of the main area where the Olympics were taking place and tried to film a music video. And the Russian police just came through and started macing them and arresting them on the spot, throwing them out, just immediately kicking. Anybody can look it up, Pussy Riot in Sochi 2014. And so it's a perfect example. They're not going to tolerate that sort of activity, unfortunately these traditionally Western Christian countries are doing right now.
Do you think that has anything to do with why NATO and the West are so against Russia right now? Because they're not conforming?
I think that's a huge part of it, because if you look at Putin and his stance on a lot of the LGBT stuff, they have laws against it. They have laws against promoting that sort of thing in Russian media, especially towards minors. They have laws where it's just not allowed to be displayed on television or anything like that, especially if it's intended for minors. I think it's a huge part of it. There's the NATO aspect of it, and everything else is kind of the more detailed look at it. But if you zoom out from a 30,000 foot perspective, it's the West that I think is increasingly secular, anti-religious, and promoting degeneracy, versus these older, more traditional religious nations like Russia. And you could even, to some degree, say these traditional Islamic countries. Not that I would agree with them on most things, but they do resist a lot of the Western agenda to a large degree.
It's funny. I was talking about it earlier, and so we go to the same school.
Yeah.
And I was talking about, I reflected on it because I'm in a new area, and I instantly made friends with this Kuwaiti guy. And this is probably my 10th Kuwaiti friend at this school. And I realized that I instantly become friends with every single Kuwaiti dude I meet at this school. And I'm friends with maybe less than 1% of the people I meet at school. And so I was like, why is that? Say, okay, well, this group of people, they come from an entirely different background. They were brought up on the other side of the planet, just different everything, but we instantly bond. Why is that? And I think it's because of what you're talking about.
Mhm.
We still both value traditions. We value religion. We value morals. And when you have that, you can instantly form this bond.
100%. And that's one of the biggest appeals that Eastern Orthodoxy had to me, was its resistance to modern changes in culture. Is the doctrines and teachings and practices in Eastern Orthodoxy have not changed for 2,000 years. The 2,000 years that Christianity has been around, Orthodoxy is the same as it always has been. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians in the West, people can get into the history behind the split between Orthodox and Catholic. But from our perspective as Eastern Orthodox, we kind of look at Western Christianity as a whole, Catholicism and Protestantism just being two sides of the same coin. And both of them, I think, have kind of given in to a lot of the cultural changes that are taking place. Mm-hmm. And when you just look at what's happening in the West, in Europe, and in our own country, there's just really not anything in place, any system in place to effectively oppose what they're pushing.
Other than that I can think of, other than the Weimar Republic in Germany in the 1920s, can you think of like any other time, based on your knowledge of Christianity, where just Christianity as a whole and religion on this scale has been attacked by culture so much to undermine it, demoralize it?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of have the perspective that it's going to continually get worse as time goes on. There will continually be more attacks against Christianity. But I think one example would be the Soviet Union, because Russia was Orthodox for almost 1,000 years, from like 988 until the early 1900s, when the Bolsheviks, who were atheist communists, took over the Russian government. They murdered the Tsar, who was an Orthodox emperor, and from that point on, they killed tens of millions of Christians, Orthodox Christians specifically, which is an interesting thing to think about, because from like the point of view of American history, we learn about how bad the Soviets were and how a lot of Russians were killed by the Soviets, but they don't tell us specifically that they were Orthodox Christians for the most part, the tens of millions that were murdered by the Soviets.
Because of their religion.
Largely, yeah. I mean, the Soviets were totally atheistic. They had a totally atheistic philosophy. So yeah, I mean, that might be one example of where, Christianity was attacked the way it is being now. But it's a little bit different now, because that was like a physical attack. That was physical persecution. Now it's kind of psychological, which in one sense isn't as bad. We're not being tortured and killed, but in another sense, it's like you almost don't even realize it's happening until it's already happened. So it can be a lot more effective the way they're going about it now. It's very subversive rather than being very straightforward. It's very subversive, and people are being influenced and having their worldview changed without even realizing it's happening.
So I agree with you. I agree that I think this is going to continue. I think it's going to continue to get worse until a major event happens. But where do you think this is going?
That's a good question. I don't know. I have no idea where this is going. I mean, I would like to see it turn into like a resurgence of Christianity, like a mass awakening where people realize what's going on and everybody wakes up and everybody gets together and pushes back against everything that we see happening. But I don't think it's a guarantee that that's going to happen necessarily. So I think it's really important that people start looking into the history of these things and understanding really what's going on, that it's not just like the geopolitical issues of the U.S. and Russia and Israel and everything else. There is, I believe, a much larger spiritual thing going on behind the scenes.
So you feel like it's a spiritual battle going on right now?
Yeah, ultimately, I think everything that happens in the physical world is a manifestation of something that's happening in the spiritual world.
Have you ever had any experience with ghosts? Or
No.
something you couldn't explain?
No, I haven't had any like paranormal experiences that I recall. Have you?
I have. I think we've talked about it
Yeah.
in the past, just with the passing of family members and just weird coincidences and things that shouldn't have happened. But I wanted to ask you to tell me about the apostles of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as Christ's first followers, after the ascension, they followed his great commission to go around the world and spreading the message that he had taught. And as they were doing that, there was, severe persecution. Almost all of them except for one, St. John, were ultimately martyred, were persecuted and killed for the message that they were teaching. And St. John himself was exiled to an island where he died.
So they were persecuted for preaching the gospel.
Yeah, 100% in the Roman Empire and among the Jewish communities within the Roman Empire. So they were kind of taking it from both angles, as far as like the local Jewish communities that they were a part of, and the Roman Empire as a whole, which demanded that you pay homage or whatever to Caesar as a god, which they of course refused to do. But they were all ultimately killed for the message that they were teaching.
And so 11 out of 12 were killed. And presumably all they had to do was denounce what they were preaching. And they didn't.
No, none of them did, which is a really interesting thing to think about when you have...
And they were in different areas.
Yeah, they were all in different areas. You have, I think St. Thomas is said to have gone as far as India. St. Andrew went up to the north. I think St. Mark went down to Egypt. St. Peter, of course, went to Rome. And they were all in different areas. And so you have this group of 12 people who are all separated from each other. And when they are, put to... They have an option to be crucified or burned at the stake or beheaded or denounce and deny what they had been teaching. Not a single one of them did. They all 100% were on board and took what they were teaching as far as Christ's message and resurrection to their graves, 100%.
And so you have to think, like, what did those guys see that they believed so much that they would die rather than just denounce what they saw?
Yeah, I think they were absolutely convinced of what they were teaching because they saw it. And so I think that says a lot for the claims of Christianity. And that carried on to the people that they converted, because we have early writings from the early church fathers, who were people that were converted by the apostles, for example, who themselves were in very similar situations where they were ultimately martyred as well. And so that went on for centuries within Rome until the persecution ended in the 4th century. But
and they were converting people by the thousands.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it almost became, to the current religion that was there, and then also the Roman Empire, became a threat to this control and this idea of the institution there.
Yeah, the interesting thing was, though, the more they persecuted the Christians, the more it spread.
It's almost like Trump.
Yeah. The more they persecute him, the more followers he gets. Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating when you look into the history of the early church and what ultimately happened there, and how it spread and how it took over the world's most powerful empire at that time.
So why do you think, and this is subjective to our opinion, but why do you think, out of all, say here in America, out of all the religions that you see on the news, you don't really see nowadays on the news dangerous Muslims or dangerous Jews or dangerous Hindus, but you hear dangerous Christians, dangerous national. Why do you think that there's this, people feel this threat to Christianity, Christians in particular?
I think it's always been that way. It's just kind of come and gone in waves. But I think Christianity has always been the biggest threat to any kind of secular power structure.
Why do you think that is?
Well, if we look at it from the perspective that I was talking about earlier, with everything ultimately being a spiritual battle, it is behind the scenes good versus evil. Mm-hmm. And Christianity is the ultimate good. Mm-hmm. And so it's the enemy of everything that's evil. And so I think Christianity will always be the number one enemy of people who want more power and want more control. So that's why I would like to see things turn in a positive direction, but I don't necessarily know that it will, because, like you brought up with the apostles, it didn't necessarily turn out positive for them, at least for a long time, mm-hmm. for several centuries, until the persecution ultimately came to an end. But they were so convinced of what they were saying and what they believed that it didn't matter. It ultimately didn't matter. So I think we need people in our country and in our culture who truly believe in what they're saying, mm-hmm. in what they believe in, and who ultimately are willing to die for it at the end of the day.
And then if you read to the end, we win.
Yes. in the end, we win. In the end, we win.
Yeah. Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I appreciate you having me, man. That's awesome.
Do you have anything coming up right now? Anything you want to share with the people, share with the world?
Well, we're working on a new business. I think you mentioned it at the very beginning. You and I have talked about it quite a bit. It's still in the early stages, so won't get into the details too much, but I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to solve a huge problem. Social media is here to stay, I think, but it also comes along with a lot of serious problems that we're all very well aware of. So I think what we're working on right now is going to really address a lot of those problems that people have. So that's the number one thing coming up right now that we're working on.
We've talked about it a lot, and I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be big.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited for this show, your podcast. It's going to be big, too.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, man.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Later.